Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Dorset Historical Society's third Thursday lunchtime lecture. Good to see so many new and familiar faces. This is where I'd like to ask you if you can, after the talk, to sign into our guest book, and also if you're not a member, to pick up a membership envelope and join our august society. We have a lot going on. I'll introduce what's going on today in a moment, but our next third Thursday lunchtime lecture will be on September 16th, and we'll have Nicole Valentine speaking. She'll be talking about her book, A Time Traveler's Guide to History, which is a young adult novel that takes place in various time periods of Dorset history. And also, for another historical society, let me do a quick plug. On August 29th, a Sunday, the Paulet Historical Society will be having their ice cream social and an interesting lecture on the Green Mountain Boy encampment of 1777 in Paulet. That's from 1:30 to 3 at their location up in the cemetery in downtown Paulet. But for today, you are in for a treat. Billy Brownlee, president of the H.N. Williams Department Store, will be talking about the recent changes to the store that's been in his family since 1840. So without any further ado, Billy Brownlee.
All right, well, thank you for having me today. I think most of you are familiar with the store, but in 2017 we had an idea to make an expansion of the store, and so this is sort of where we were at back then. And the idea, what happened was, this was my uncle's shop, which we've since demoed, but it used to be a hydrant shop. He made hydrants for snowmaking capabilities, and when he retired, he sold his the company to an outfit out in Colorado, and then we bought the property. And Martin Grover was a roofing company that operated out of there for several years, but we ended up coming up with a plan to expand, and this was where we started. So in 2017 and 18, this is essentially the plan that we came up with, and it's, you know, it's pretty close to what we built, and there's some changes, but essentially these are what we presented to the town, and as we went through Act 250 during the permit process. And I think my brother is the one that did all these 3D modeling, and I think this would have been a much harder pitch if you just had traditional white engineering drawings, but to actually visualize this the way that this, it made it much more palatable for people to wrap their head around, because the reality is sometimes gas stations have a negative connotation, and so it was important for us to be able to relay that, you know, we care what this thing looks like. We're going to spend a lot of time and energy to make this look and feel, and hopefully fit into the area as best we can. And again, as I go through this, please stop me if you have any questions. I'd like to make this as much of an open dialogue as possible. So once we were going through the permitting, and we knew this was sort of the inside of the shop, and this is one of the first things that we started doing, is collecting pallets and ripping pallets apart. So if you're in the post and beam of the new part of the gas station and you look behind the main registers, that entire wall behind the post and beam is made out of pallet wood. And so it's got a very unique look to it, and it's, to me, so what we would do is literally, we had a tool that was meant to rip these apart, and then we got the flat boards out of them. So it was repurposing the pallet wood for the most part. So that took, you know, we did that in the fall of 18. And the next thing that happened was we used this building before we demoed it to take the frame of the post and beam and all of the mortise and tendon. We started off with raw, huge beams, and Doug Crozier is the gentleman that did it. But essentially, he did all of the mortise and tenon for the frame inside the building. And then once we got to, and that's just Doug, once we got the beams cut, we stacked them outside and pulled them all out, covered them up, and we saved that for, till we were ready for them. So while we're doing the construction, there are many different things moving together at the same time. So this is the inside of the big barn. So if we were to actually go, the entrance that a lot of people use now behind the store and goes in where all the green is, that's this building. And essentially what we did was, this is where a lot of the lawn and garden products are today. And all we did was create an envelope inside of that building, because this is a much bigger building than what we needed, and the heated retail space was very valuable to us. So that's essentially what they're doing there. All right, that's my brother Steven. And so that building that we essentially are about to demo, we tried to reclaim as much wood off of that building as we can, or as we could. So all of the interior boards and all of the exterior boards, we would literally take one nail at a time to pull all those boards off, and it was my brother and myself doing all of that work. And when you look in the store today, if you look up, the post and beam, you'll see the post and beam, but a lot of the ceiling is new wood. And then the exterior or the interior walls, most of it is reclaimed wood. But the nice thing about that reclaimed wood is that it makes the frame pop, and it's to me much more desirable, because it's such a unique look. And so anyway, we spent a lot of time, and as we go to the next frame, you'll see we're literally taking all these boards off. We also, I believe, let's see, once we were able to get everything off, we essentially, it was time for them to do the demolition part of the building. And that's that there. And that's what it looked like when we were done. When we got to this point, this is when it became very real for me that this thing was moving forward, because the building was gone, and it was the start of, essentially the construction piece.
How long had that building been there?
So that building was built in '72, I believe, and again, that was from my Uncle Roger, who was the one that built that.
It's nice that you could use the, keep the wood, like that's nice.
It was great.
Billy, would you have guessed that it was more expensive to reclaim the wood than to purchase new wood?
Probably, when you factor in labor, yes. But the character you gain is, you can't, it's apples and oranges.
Did you have to do any processing of the wood that you're reclaiming? Did you strip it, sand it, have to do anything, or just?
Yeah, I mean, we had to, there were some parts that weren't useful, so we trimmed and used. With the pallet wood, we did end up staining it to give it some more rich color, and obviously they're not, the tough part with pallet wood is it's all different widths, and so there was some, I guess, manicuring to make them a little more uniform. But on the bigger boards, no, we were, the hardest thing is just making sure. Fortunately, a lot of the gray boards that were on the outside of the building were all the same width, and so we didn't have to do. So it made it easier when they were vertical on the outside of the building, and when we used them on the interior of the walls, we did them horizontally. And so it made it much easier doing that when they're all the same width. So this is when the site work guys started showing up. It's probably hard to remember, but the road that over here that goes up to the fire department, that incline used to start almost where the excavator is now, and it was a tight corner, and the fire department didn't like it. So this is one of the first things we did was to lower that road.
Is that road yours, Billy, or it is?
It's on the
a right of way
property
to
of the
homes
store,
behind?
but it is the right of way to the houses behind the store. And so this is the entrance. This is probably our most used entrance now, believe it or not. But that's not how it was originally intended, but that's what we have today. But that's the old inside of the shop. We actually reclaimed that garage door, and that's what they're putting in there. And this is what it was like before. And right now, there is a lot of activity currently that's like I said, that's the most used entrance of the building right now. And that's my father. And this is when, so the next thing, the road was lowered, and now they're prepping for the two 15,000 gallon tanks that we're gonna put into the ground. One of the things we ran into was that there's ledge, and so what we had to do, I think, is drill in and use dynamite to get that, so we could put that in there. And so one of my favorite things, actually, while they're doing that, at the same time, remember, multiple things are happening. So we would have loved to have started this project sooner, but the dynamite of going through that ledge had to be done before we could start pouring concrete, because the concrete takes a long time to cure. And so you don't want to pour concrete footings and then all of a sudden blow up dynamite in close proximity and then have the integrity of the concrete diminish. And so now that they started the excavation and the process of putting the tanks in, you know, the foundation of the post and beam and the beginning of the connection to the old store is happening at the same time. I don't know if this is going to work. This is actually a video. This was one of my favorite things to do. They let me push the button. And so what you saw happen were huge rubber mats, and they're actually old tires that they chain together. And what that does is keep the rocks from spraying and because they can cause a lot of destruction. But essentially, when you hit you hit the dynamite button, this is what you're left with, and then they excavate it out. And the interesting part of what happened to all this material, this is the base material that the quarry took for their parking. So when the quarry, and so it was like a win-win. It was a close thing for us to drop, and then it helped them create a nice parking area.
How deep are the holes in the tanks?
I think I have a feeling that we were probably 18 feet down. I'm guessing a little bit there. I forget exactly. But this guy here is 6 feet. There's probably two or 3 feet of stone there plus, so maybe not 18. But I think, you know, those tanks have to ride on, maybe they're not that deep. Maybe it's probably 12 to 15 feet. But those tanks are coming on, you know, huge flatbed trucks. So they can't be so tall because of power lines.
Bill, you said 2 tanks. You saw 4 different grades.
So there's two 15,000 tanks. One of the tanks has 3 partitions in it, or 2 partitions, three.
What are the tanks made of?
It's a fiberglass, it's their fiberglass. And so, you know, I know a lot more about tanks than I probably ever thought I would, but, you know, steel tanks and double wall tanks. So they're double wall fiberglass, so, you know, the cost of putting gas in from the start is incredibly expensive. I mean, the gas alone, we had probably $500,000 into it. It's a double, but it's safer than it ever has been. There's controls within the double wall and there's sensors that if there's a water coming in to that cavity or gas going into the cavity, there's sensors that let us know that that's happening. And so it's safer than it ever has been, but more expensive to put in too. Whoops.
That looks like fun.
Okay, there are the tanks. So because we ended up using dynamite, you know, essentially you're creating a bathtub of ledge. And so what we had to do is, these are concrete anchors, and when you can, I don't know if you can sort of see them, but they essentially there's two of those on both sides and they strap over it. And what that does is keeps the tanks from actually, because if the tanks were empty and those weren't there and that water, there's enough pressure it would go through the concrete. But
What's the life of those tanks guaranteed?
well, it's coming on a 52-foot flatbed, so it's probably about that.
No, I'm sorry, the time, lifespan.
Oh, I think it's 70 years, if not longer.
Unlike a steel tank.
The steel double wall, I mean, you're looking at a 20-year, and that's probably, and the risk, I mean, this is by far the, you know, the direction. I think you can, I don't know, I think you have to have double wall fiberglass right now. And there was right before we did this, there was I don't know, there were a lot of gas stations, I don't know if you noticed or not, but that were pulling tanks out, and it was because it was a federal mandate. So this is what site work for the foundation of the new post and beam. My wife and my kids, for the couple of days it was wide open, enjoyed doing laps inside, so that was kind of fun. You know, we did have to drape plastic over here because because of how close we were to the other building. We had to make sure the integrity of that structure was not jeopardized. And again, we talked about the ballasting of the tanks. So the fire department, you know, because again, we created that bathtub underneath the tanks, we had to fill these things with water initially to make sure that they didn't pop. And so that's what the fire department is doing for us, is literally filling those tanks with water, and we had to pull it out, obviously, before the gas came.
Does that mean that you have to continue to be careful about maintaining ballast in the tank?
No, they're constantly pretty full. It's something we're conscious of, but that's what you paid extra for those concrete things, and so it would take a lot to do that, but it's you know, I don't think it's a real issue.
Somewhat related, but are you doing any electric chargers or anything? There's like 3 companies that do that are national. Are you gonna tap into one of those?
So I think that would, I was kind of hoping to, you know, we were originally thinking about, to me, I think we're at a little bit of a transition period. This is just my opinion with regards to electric cars. It's tough. I don't think there's a model for selling power. And the power's got to come, so there might be areas to, I'm just not quite there yet. I think because you have older cars and newer cars and you have different charging, the high-speed ones I don't think the market is matured enough for the investment personally. My thoughts are, you know, if we were able to expand to the north, if the fire department ever was in a position where they were gonna relocate, to me, that is the better spot to put something like that in. So I think it's something down the road that we would definitely consider. I think right now, it's premature, I guess.
So there's different hookups for different cars, which is crazy. But-
Yeah. And the high-speed ones are really, you know, you're still talking about, and I could be off on my numbers, I haven't looked at this in a while, but I think even, you know, you're still talking about a $12 charge. So how do you recoup that? And if it's just relying on sales inside the store, I'm not sure if I have a comfort level in doing so with that at this point. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Mhm.
Billy, good, tangentially related to that, how did you determine that there was an economic opportunity in selling fuel? I know, John, we had, and I didn't attend, but we talked about the history of filling stations in Dorset at some point.
I was at that one, actually.
How did you come to recognize this as an opportunity?
Well, I think part of it was seeing the success of the Watsonville market up in towards Stratton had. They have very similar traffic patterns that we have in front of the store, and when I started, because you can get a lot of the traffic patterns from the state of Vermont, from the Agency of Transportation, and, you know, I also had an idea of what a couple of other gas stations around, and essentially came up with an approximate number of where we would be from a sales standpoint. And given that the numbers worked, because you can forecast, and so we were pretty conservative in forecasting our numbers, and just because we'd rather err on the side of caution.
Have you exceeded them?
We have exceeded them.
Good for you.
Does it seem like it's additive to other sales, or are they?
It's all,
People
we have
tend to check in
a-
at the pump and take off.
there's people that definitely just wanna get gas and go. But we have definitely, we have a lot of momentum right now, I guess is a good way of putting it. And, you know, I think it's the whole package, to be honest with you. So it's a part that does filter into the rest. More site work, concrete. So this is the guy cutting into the old building, and so this doorway here is an egress out of the older part of the store, and what we are essentially doing here is turning the stairs so that it exits that way, and then we're gonna essentially, when you go, if you're familiar with the store, you go down the ramp and you'll see the transition from the tile to the wood. That's that corner, which is hard to believe. But, and then essentially you're coming, you know, you're gonna come down this, and that's when you go take the right into the older part of the store. So that's where we're at right now with this picture. So if you've never seen one of these big concrete trucks, you know, the concrete delivery, you know, that spin, and they dump into the back of this, and it literally pumps up and over. And this gentleman here has a joystick, and he's the one that is controlling the flow and the position of where this boom actually is. So there's poured concrete, and it's, you know, while this is all going on, we're still operating in fully operational on the retail side too. This was, so you may remember that in 07, 08, if you were around then, this was our second, so this is the second major renovation that we've done in my time at the store. When we did the renovation and put essentially a new foundation under the old part of the store, that's how we ended up with the basement. We did that and we didn't close at all. So this is much less, this is a bigger project, but much less intrusive than what we experienced back 12 years ago. But that's kind of a neat picture. Now we get into mechanical, And, you know, essentially this is a slab on grade for the most part for the post and beam, but we spent a tremendous amount of time trying to, because most of the mechanical is in the concrete, you really only get one shot at it. And so, you know, I guess I'm satisfied with how we designed it because it seems to work right now, so. There they are, prepping and doing more work to the tanks. So this is a canopy showing up. So these, it's probably hard to see, but those are 4 by 4 by 4 concrete blocks and there's 6 of them that anchor, those are the footings for the canopy.
Is that canopy pretty heavy?
So we're in Vermont. All of these canopies are built to withstand Florida hurricanes. So I have to believe it was overbuilt for Vermont. Some more mechanical. And so we had 2 things going vertical at the same time. One of them is the canopy, and the others, they're about to pour more concrete. And so this is the ramp, and that's the last thing that they poured. And then we began the post and beam, which is to me one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. So that's Doug Crozier. So that now all this stuff was being done. These pieces, like when you think of them like Legos, were all set aside. That we did the mortise and tenon back in March, and now we're uncovering them and putting all the pieces together. Mechanical for the gas. These are what these are sort of the gas, what's beneath the gas pump. So these are, you know, the upper parts of the frame, and we essentially built as much as we could on the ground, just because it's cheaper, costs less, as opposed to trying to do it 15 feet in the air. So we essentially did 3 of these on the ground. More gas. And I tried to do this in time sequence, just so you could get an idea of all the different things that were going on at the same time. And so this is essentially the point. They're about to connect the pumps to the inside electrical all the way to the tanks. So this is when we had probably the biggest mess, and it was this was probably the most intrusive the project was, because we had so much wide open. We had still customers trying to drive through and flow, and this is when it seemed like we were running out of space. But
what time of the year was that? Was in
so this is still
fall?
no.
No, June.
Did it say? What?
June of 19.
Yeah. So this is June. So we really started in April, and we opened October 19th.
Wow.
So again, this is one completed bay. It's hard to tell, but there's 2 of them side by side, and then there's a third one, I think, down on the other end. And so again, we're trying to do. So they're setting these posts. So all these posts have to be set, and then I think they're doing that here. So they're setting all the posts. You can see it up here. They're all set. These are all built. And then, this is my favorite day, I think. Noel Dido came with the crane and picked these 3 things up. And this all happened in one day. And the next one, so you can see these 3 were essentially put up. That was exciting. The next thing would be that we were going to essentially connect the two open bays that were in the top of that frame. Sorry, the picture. So now this is July 1st. So one of the things that is different than, with the post and beam, this is the finish of what we were talking about, that brand new wood, right? And so if the entire store looked like that, interior walls and all, I don't think it would have the same look and feel that it does, from having a lot of that reclaimed wood on the interior walls. The other thing to think about is that these are built backwards. And so what I mean by that is, so we're insulating from the top down. And so the spray foam, we ended up spray foaming the ceiling, but they came and then did that essentially from the top down. A lot of times you're insulating from the bottom up. And because we essentially had the finish was already on when we put them on, we had to do it this way. Another part of the project was the ATM, and that's what's going on here. That's the Bank of Bennington. And so in this picture you can see, I was gone the day they actually sprayed it, but that picture has the spray foam in it.
So you essentially have two walls, insulation in between,
You mean in the ceiling?
even on the walls.
In the wall, that's correct. So you have the
Yeah.
frame, and then the exterior wall is there just to hold the sandwich of insulation and finish in the exterior wall. The structure is really the stable part of this. So here's one of the things we did with the pallet wood was, if you're at the existing coffee bar and you're looking behind, you'll see these are the backsplashes that I made, and essentially this is what we essentially put a two-part epoxy on top of this, and then inserted them in between the posts, and that's it kind of gave it a cool look, but it also satisfied the health department for food, sort of a food production area. But that's, to me, I like that look. Here's the porch. So the upper two pictures of the porch. This is just where we're at. So this is the trickiest part of the project, or one of the trickiest parts of the project, is connecting the old with the new. And you essentially have three buildings that you're trying to connect. You have, well, the old building, you have the new building, and then you have this building as well. And to get those all on the same, it was challenging, but this is the hardest part, because the ramp is there because we have a 2-foot change in elevation between the finished floor of the old building and the floor of this building. And so the ramp allows us to have that change in elevation take place without having a handrail. So the slope meets the handicap, what's the right way? It's 1:20 ratio, but essentially we can put that ramp in and not have a handrail. So that's how the ramp came to be. There's our good friend, Mr. Tyler. So here we are, August 1st. And so we are, think about it, April, May, June, July. We're 4 months in right now. So the fire pump. So this was one of the not scarier things, but we had to, 12 years ago, we put in the first sprinkler system, first pump, and it was a single phase pump. And without going into greater detail, we had to significantly upgrade our pump, but it required changing to a 3-phase. And what that means is, from the power line, we had a conduit that ran into the old part of the store that had this, for the single phase pump. The new pump required us to run 3 wires through, and the whole project hinged on this ability to do so. So when the day came when they actually pulled us through, it was a huge relief, because it would have created a lot of issues for us getting 3-phase power into the building down into where it was, because there was so much mechanical space. It would have been a nightmare. Fortunately, they were able to get all 3 wires through that conduit, and we went from this pump to that pump. So, there's my daughter, and she was on crutches, but she's a huge helper. So again, we're in August. You can see the ATM is getting constructed. We started doing the tile floor. Porch. So we were essentially winging how to build this counter and how to build the whole thing. And so one of the things that was helpful for me was to go through and lay tape down of the different fixtures that we needed to make sure that we had the space laid out right, so that we could literally know how the flow, or get a better idea of how the flow is going to work. Because it's one thing to have it on paper, to actually stand there and get an idea of it. So insulators, so there's spray foam up above, there's dense pack in the walls. My kids are on the roof. Again, this is a change in color. These aren't the boards that we ripped off, but it's older 1-by that we had. But that change in color, it makes it different. It feels warmer. So there's the pallet wood I'm talking about. So that entire pallet behind the entire wall behind the registers is all pallet wood. And that's my brother Steven. And so this is these are the gray boards that we pulled off of the building that we reclaimed. And now they started on the roof. This took forever. There's a lot of different, it's just a lot of, so let me talk about, I never really talked about this. So this peak was unnecessary, and from a budget standpoint, when we were hemming and hawing about, whether to do this, that was one of the easier things to cherry pick, to say, if you want to save money, take this thing away. To me, when you look at the red building and the white building of the old store, then you have this gable end with the canopy gable, and even the fire department. It just creates more synergy, and so this was an important piece for me when we were going through the design on how this was going to look.
It's all dummy space?
It's all dummy space.
I think you were right to do it.
Yeah. And there's the canopy being built. And so the Dido came back. He was here multiple times. They're just putting trusses up there. If you ever want to see what the inside of a... So it could have, many gas stations, because of the expense, just stop there. And that's what you have for canopies. And for us, it was important to have this look. More progress. So one of the things we did here is we had all the architectural maps or drawings, and we buried them inside the wall. So someday somebody might find them.
Didn't trust the historical society?
I have plenty more if they want some. So this is just more site work being done. So that's that backsplash that we popped in between the two posts that we built flat, and so that and there they are right there. That's a very late night of me. Probably didn't need to see my ugly mug there, but it's my Stephen and Garrett working in the background. This is my daughter vacuuming, and Max, he likes to just stand around and watch sometimes, but nieces, nephews. But this is the finished wall, and this is to me one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. You know, the final product. We used a lot of two-part epoxy, so this is that, you know, what we finished with the counter. So these boards were the interior of that shop that we demoed, and so all we ended up doing, and that's what we're doing here. This is like the final push. All the staff were all in, and we essentially were pouring this epoxy to create almost like a glass look. Ceiling fan going up. And again, this is that, it's hard to tell right now, but this is the old part, the ramp, and then the new part's all this way, obviously, but that's essentially, you don't think about it, so the sled that's hanging from the ceiling down the ramp, that's where that kind of is right there. Pavers, and these guys are back if you haven't noticed, doing some more work currently. We had to put in a new septic field, and so that's actually where the if you go to the farmer's market where the gentleman plays music up on the top of the hill, so that's this space up here, so it actually pumps up to that space. Our first delivery of fuel in this is a little blurry, but this is me, two of my brothers, and my father. So, but that's essentially, this picture is the registers on the north side, and that's again, this is all pallet wood, but it's it ends up being a really rich. This was a very late night for me that I was there solo. And here we are into October. And so there's still a lot of stuff that needed to happen. You know, we still had, the parking lot was ripped up, and, you know, we're still doing, you know, we re-sided the big barn, but still working on the entrance. So a lot of, when you go into the store now, above the new cooler where all the beer is and some of the sodas, when you look up above, a lot of the older items, artifacts that were up there, all came out of the barn across the street from my grandmother's house. And so this is us cleaning them up. This is the big sled that I was talking about, and that was all in the barn across the street. And there's my father doing the ceremonial first pump. And so we were able to open the gas before opening the store, so there was about a week where we were able to have customers begin to use the gas pumps before the store actually opened up. And that's my daughter going to work and then getting rewarded. And just some more finishing touches. You know, this is essentially this is like the last piece. So this is us opening up where the old part of the store and the new part, actually the last piece of the puzzle. And that's sort of.
So,
That's not a good picture, but what happened. So,
So now that you're in there,
yes.
you've got more space, you're selling more things, what's the surprise to you in terms of what you're selling more of that you didn't think you'd be in, or what are the good and the bad?
So groceries have definitely way exceeding expectations, and I think a lot of, I think we would have gotten there eventually, but I think COVID actually accelerated how quickly we got there, and how kind of impacted our decision to do more groceries. You know, when COVID first hit, there was an immediate spike in people, in people of wanting to avoid the grocery store. And so we were, a lot of people, you know, at that point we started adding produce, and we started adding proteins, meats, and stuff like that. And throughout COVID, a lot of people really relied on using us as a resource. And so we've been able to continue to develop that, and we think it's got legs even when this is all said and done, that it's gonna be a part of our business. But that's essentially it. I don't know if anybody has any questions about construction or about where we're at right now, or anything whatsoever. I'm happy to, I don't know how much time we have. We're at 12:48, so.
How long did it take to fill the tanks the first time?
So there's two 15,000 gallon tanks. You mean just to?
Just the first time to fill them up, like when that truck pulled in?
It takes about an hour for them
Oh,
to
that's
get.
it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so you have two 15,000 gallon tanks, and those tankers are probably 10,500 is what they typically carry. And those have partitions in them too, so that one tank can bring, you know, 6,000 gallons of this and 2,000 gallons of that, diesel and, you know, non-ethanol, and then there's regular 87. So it'll typically bring some of all three.
Who's your supplier? Where do you get?
Sunoco. So one of the things, you know, Sunoco probably doesn't like this, but we really didn't want a huge Sunoco sign out, so we actually engaged the town to make sure that they had their signage right before we applied for a permit, because as much as the town doesn't want to see it, we didn't want it you know, we don't want a big Sunoco sign out there. The gas pumps essentially say we sell gas. We don't need the Sunoco sign taking away from our image.
Although it is confusing when I get my credit card bill. It
Because
doesn't
it
say
says
H&M,
Sunoco,
it
it says
says
Sunoco on it.
Sunoco, yes. Wait, where was that? When was I at Sunoco?
Well, you did a fabulous job. And it's really a torture job.